Hello, welcome to Holding Space, Navigating Micro and Macro Conflict with a Generous Approach. My name's Meg Bulger, and I'm going to be your facilitator for this asynchronous guided recording. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me, a little bit about how the session came to be, and then what you can expect from the guided recording, and we'll jump right into it. So, a little bit about me. I am a social justice educator and facilitator trainer. I started my career doing gender and sexuality education, moved into teaching people how to do that gender and sexuality education. So helping people set up workshops and training programs in their organizations or their universities. I did that work when I co-founded the Safe Zone Project, which is an LGBTQ inclusion education resource. And we traveled all around the country doing train the trainers and helping people start Safe Zone programs. It was in that work that I got really fascinated and hooked on this idea of facilitation and the power of facilitation to make it possible for groups to have difficult conversations, challenging learning experiences, to talk about controversial topics. And from that work, I co-authored a book called Unlocking the Magic of Facilitation, which was really getting into some of those things that I was increasingly passionate about, of what can we do as educators and facilitators to help people along in their process or their journey, and how do we keep groups together when moving through difficult or challenging experiences. And I've also been, for the last 2 years, the founder and head of Facilitator Cards, which is this little deck of facilitation tools and processes that you can use no matter what type of facilitation you're doing to be more intentional and creative and create more cohesive structures for people to move through kind of guided experiences together. So you might guess from my bio, I'm really big into facilitation. I'm really big into group work and how do we navigate challenges together. And that's really what brought me to this session. So how this session came to be is that there were some challenging moments that were coming up in core sessions, specifically around identity, power dynamics, and DEIB related issues. And Chief wanted to provide more resources and more support for you, the guides, on how to address those challenging moments, and how just making sure that you had a number of different strategies for moving through and moving the group through those kind of conflict or those conflict moments. So we hope this can be a catalyst for future conversations, and hopefully this continues to serve as a resource and a support for you when those challenges come up. So a little bit about the session. We are really focused on how can we meet those challenging moments in our core sessions where our goal is to reduce fracture and increase trust within the group. So what I find is that when these conflict moments come up, there's a real opportunity for that to actually fracture the group and create a lot of distrust. And what we're trying to do as facilitators and guides is how can we actually reduce the likelihood that creates a lasting fracture within the group? And is there an opportunity in a way for us to actually increase trust when those challenging moments come up? So we're going to do that a couple of different ways. We're going to look at mindsets that shape our moves as guides and as facilitators. So what are the underlying structures behind the strategies that we can employ? How do we move towards our members without necessarily agreeing with them? So oftentimes if somebody says something that creates this disruption or challenge or just strong disagreement within the room, there is a feeling of I need to balance extending towards this person while also not leaving the group behind. So how do we balance that? How do we move towards both the person who might have put the conflict in the room and keep the group together at the same time? And how do we then move or change direction and bring everybody with us? What it can sometimes feel like for these challenging moments is that we've been pulled in a particular direction, and we're going to explore how do we kind of take back that control and agency to bring the group in a productive direction for everyone in the group in those challenging moments. There is going to be a resource page that we have created that will link to everything that you're going to hear in this asynchronous recording. So whether it's the projects in my bio, the frameworks that we introduced, the theories that we mention, or even just the slides that you're seeing right here, everything is going to be on that resource page, and that is linked below. Interaction in this in this recording looks a couple of different ways. If you're interested in just watching a session live and not doing any participation, we will leave a link to one of the videos of the entirety of one of the sessions below. What we did in this asynchronous recording is that we wanted to create opportunities for you to actively participate, not just observe. So there's going to be opportunities for some live polling. We're going to create some breaks for journaling and give you specific prompts and timings for doing that. There will be a worksheet that you can check out and that you can fill in, as well as example worksheets that you can reference after you've filled in to kind of just see what some other answers were. And we're also going to share back some of the live discussions, some of the discussions from the live sessions and some of the debriefs so that you can kind of be brought into the sessions in that way. So that's what this session is going to look like. And we're going to jump into the live polling right now. So we are going to start by inviting you to reflect on how do you feel around these moments of micro and macro conflict. Maybe they've come up, or maybe you just anticipate them coming up. We're going to ask you some questions to establish a baseline going into this session. So to do that, we're going to need you to go to this link, ahaslides.com/hschief. There's also a link below if you'd prefer to just click on that. Once you are there, ahaslides.com/hschief, it is going to look something like this. So we're going to use this live polling software a few different times throughout our guided recording here, a way for you to submit your answers, and then I will also share with you some of the answers that came up in the live sessions. So let's jump into it. First question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how anxiety producing do you find these moments? Either you've had them, or maybe you anticipate having these moments of conflict around DEIB related conversations or topics. Do you feel 1, no anxiety, or 10, loads of anxiety? Go ahead and click whatever number feels true for you and hit submit. Okay, this is what it looked like for the guides in our live sessions. So we really spanned the entire range. Some of us were down here in this 1, no anxiety, and we also had folks that said 10 out of 10, lots of anxiety around these moments. So no matter where you submitted, know that there are other guides right there with you. Okay, let's go to the next question. Next question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready do you feel to handle these moments? 1, completely unprepared, 10, totally prepared. Go ahead and select your answer and hit submit. And all of these live polling questions are collected totally anonymously. It's just our way of kind of getting the aggregate data rather than anybody's specific information. Okay, here's what the group looked like in the aggregate in the live session. So on a scale of 1 to 10, that's our last one. Let's see where we are. On a scale of 1 to 10, how ready do you feel to handle these moments? So again, we had a really big range, people down at 1 all the way up to 10, with the majority of the group coming in that kind of 5 to 7 range, feeling somewhat prepared, but also could feel more prepared. Okay, and our last question is, when it comes to navigating these types of moments, I have no strategies or a ton of different strategies or somewhere in between. Go ahead and drag the dot to what feels true for you. Okay, once you've hit submit on that, this is what it looked like for the group. So again, we were in that kind of middling place of most of us don't have no strategies or very, very few strategies, but we also don't feel like we have a ton of different strategies. And our hope is that during this session, during this guided recording, we can lower your anxiety about these moments, even if it's just 1 point of lowering that anxiety, make you feel a little bit more ready, a little more prepared, and also give you some new or just additional strategies that you can use when those moments of conflict come up. So that's our goal in the session, and we will revisit these questions at the end. So mindsets are what shape and form our strategies. They are, to me, what the kind of like underlying message and the moves that we make as facilitators. And they kind of like are the paradigm underneath our approach. And so that's why I think they're so important. But also mindsets operate in the background for all of us all the time, us, our members, the people that we're working with in sessions. And when that is true. It can help, it can kind of like shape the like energy that we're putting out into the room and shape the assumptions we make and the stories that we make about people when they participate. So I'm specifically going to have us look at a mindset that I think operates, that I see pop up a lot when we are in conflict, when people say something that we fundamentally disagree with, or when people have really differences of opinion on something that's important to them. And this mindset comes from Catherine Schultz, who is a wrongness scientist. She kind of studies what it's like when we think people are wrong and we think we're right, and what that dynamic creates. And she talks about a series of assumptions that we make when we're in disagreement with somebody, or I think when we are trying to figure out why somebody believes the things they believe or is saying the things that they're saying. So I'm going to introduce this to you and we'll kind of see if it resonates or checks out. Okay, so the first assumption that we make when we think we're right and we think somebody else is wrong is that we try to explain that gap by assuming that person is coming from a place of ignorance. Okay, so ignorance just being like, they don't know something that I know. That's what is shaping their understanding of what they're saying, right? And this ignorance could be them saying something that is hurtful, harmful, problematic. And when that happens, that can be a moment that creates dysregulation within the group, creates like conflict within the group. But it's simply just like, maybe they're coming from a place of not understanding what I know. And when ignorance is the problem, a lot of times we move into an educational space. We move into a space where we're like, how can I address this ignorance, or how can I like correct for it? And those are the kind of like moves that we make. When that doesn't work, or that person is just like not open to receiving that type of new information, then the next place that we sometimes go to like figure out why this person is saying what they're saying or doing what they're doing is that person is stupid. Okay. And this isn't, we're not saying this out loud to anybody. This is all operating in the background, right? And stupid just to me means like the information that I gave them is outside of the context or capacity they have to make sense of it. Like they cannot make sense of the information that I have in the way that I make sense of it. They're not connecting the dots or putting the information together. And when that doesn't check out, because this person is incredibly smart, or this person is just like, we know that that's not the reason, then the last place that we go is we assume, all right, maybe you're just evil. Maybe that there is just something core wrong, different, or bad about you that like holds why you hold that truth and I hold this truth. Okay. And this kind of escalation of ignorant, stupid, evil is something that I have seen be really pervasive in our conversations about politics, in our conversations about social justice, about DEIB in the last few years. And I see that like escalation happening. Yeah, somebody just said the like news and social media promote this idea, right? And I think in the last 10 years, it's not only like become more pervasive, but also where we start has changed. So I think 10 years ago, there was a lot of like, man, that person's so ignorant about this thing. And then it would kind of like this was what, I would see this happen on Facebook where it would be like, I can't believe somebody's so ignorant. And then a conversation would happen in the comments. And then it would kind of escalate to like, man, you're being really stupid. And then it would kind of finish at evil. And what I have found is that in the last 10 years, there's actually been like an escalation of where we start, where we don't start with ignorance anymore. We actually sometimes start at stupid or evil. And that makes it so much more difficult to connect people across difference and to like have conversations with people who have different perspectives when this is the mindset that like we might be bringing in, or that like our groups might be bringing in unconsciously in the background to an experience or a conversation, right? So yeah, I'm seeing some comments in the chat that like this has to do with fear, the brain gets hijacked. Absolutely. So my question to you, and just over on AHA slides, if you're still there, is do you see this mindset showing up in your world? Do you see it in your life, in your conversations, in your discourse, at work, on social media? Okay. All right. So for most of us, yes, some of us are, and sometimes, and a couple of us doesn't resonate, and that's totally fine. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I want to share briefly a story about a time where I was facilitating and where I think this mindset could have been so easy to go into, and instead something else happened. And that really, I think, changed the entire dynamic. So this is, I call this my Welder story. So I was facilitating a number of years ago in rural Washington at a community college, and I was facilitating a town hall, which was about like 100 people or so in this big room. And about half the people were like queer students who were on campus, who were so stoked that we were there and that they were like going to get to talk about this. And then about half the room were people who were receiving extra credit and completely resented being there. So you can imagine, super fun facilitation environment. And one of those people was sitting kind of straight in front of my eyesight, arms crossed, leaned back, just like, oh, don't want to be here. And this guy was retraining to be a welder. He told me that, which is why I remember it. And about 5 minutes into the session, this dude raises his hand and he says, he kind of just like lets out like a litany of like questions that are really just like his, disagreements and like, oh, like, why are there so many LGBT? There's so many letters, and I thought queer was a bad word. And why do people have bumper stickers on your car? Like, I don't have an I'm straight bumper sticker on my car. Like, and he just, just the greatest hits of like questions as resistance. And I was like, okay, all right, we're going to take your questions one at a time. And we took his questions one at a time, and we were like, there are a lot of letters, and, queer is a tricky word, and like, here's why bumper stickers. And this guy, after sitting through our answers, he goes, you want to know what my real problem is? And I was like, yes, I do. And he said, 20 years ago, I was in the military and I was on shore leave, and I wandered into a bar. I didn't know it was a gay bar. And I was like, I don't know where this story is going. And he was like, I don't know it was a gay bar. And the looks those people gave me, get out of here. You're not welcome here. I wasn't very inclusive. I wasn't very welcoming, was it? And I said, that sucks. And he was like, does suck. And I was like, yeah, that feeling sucks. When you're just trying to hang out, relax, you're not looking for any trouble, like, and you get to made feel unwelcome, like you're not supposed to be there. That feeling sucks. I get that feeling. I've had that feeling my share, of like wandering into spaces, into straight bars where people like just doesn't feel like a comfortable place for me to be. And I'm not looking to like bother anybody, but it's just people make me feel unwelcome for just like who I am in that space. I get that feeling. And like, really, that feeling is why we're here, because we're actually having this conversation because we don't want people to feel that way. Like moving through the world, we don't want people to feel that way. And you understand that feeling can really like hang out with you and like how it really affects people. And he kind of like uncrossed his arms and like leaned forward and was like, huh. And he like paid attention the whole rest of the time. And he came up to us afterward and he said, I have not thought about most of the things you said today, and appreciate the conversation. And I was like, cool. And he shook my hand and he walked out. And I was like, all right, what just happened? How did that dude go from like rah, 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 to like interesting ideas, everybody? Like, how did we do that? And I want to let that story marinate in your brain for the next 5 minutes or so. Okay, so you've just heard the Welder story, and now we're going to introduce a second mindset to you. We're going to talk about Glasser's 5 needs from choice theory. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to tell you a little bit about Glasser's, and I'm going to pop us back over to AHA Slides to do some live polling. So I'm going to introduce the theory. We're going to do some live polling with it. I will again share the answers that came up in the live sessions with you, and then we're going to move into some journal exercises together. So Glasser's 5 needs, Glasser's choice theory posits that all humans have 5 core needs and that we have these needs in different amounts. For some of us, they show up in smaller ways, and for some of us, they show up in bigger ways, but all of us have these 5 core needs. So if you can go ahead and again, open up AHA Slides, that same link, and just advance to the next slide. When you get there, it should look something like this. So the 5 needs from Glasser's choice theory are security, love and belonging, power and recognition, freedom, and fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out a short definition of each of one of these needs, and then I'm going to ask you to assess yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being small and 10 being big. How big does this need show up in your life for you personally? So let's jump into it. Security. Security is the need for physical health, includes the physical need for health, shelter, and nourishment, as well as the psychological aspect of feeling safe and secure. So if you think about that being a security need, how big does this show up for you on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being small and 10 being big? Just to give you a little bit more context about what I mean around small and big, I go to a conference every year, and every year when I arrive, somebody there, I'm like, hey, where are you staying? And they're like, I don't know yet. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean? And they're like, oh yeah, I just like crash with somebody every time. Like it tends to work out. Like it just, I'm very happy to do that. And I was like, oh, okay. And then there are other people who like get there the day earlier. They've scoped out every restaurant. They know where they're eating every meal. Those people have really different needs for security, even though they both need a place to stay, a place to eat, the feeling of safety. They just have really different security needs, right? So for you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your security need? Go ahead and hit submit. Okay, this is what it looked like for our guides in the session. So we were really all over the map, leaning a little bit heavier towards a need for a little bit more security, but again, we kind of spanned the whole range. Okay, so next question is love and belonging. So love and belonging is the need for relationships, for social connection, to give and receive affection, to feel part of a group. So that's our definition of love and belonging. How big does love and belonging show up for you in your life? How big a need is that for you? 1 to 10. And this is very much a first thought, best thought. I know for most of us, this is a totally new theory and way of kind of looking at ourselves. So just trust your instincts and just pick a number. Okay, this is where it was for the group. So, let me pop that up. Here we go. Okay, here's what it was for the group. So this one graph looks a little bit different. It skewed a little bit higher with, a good chunk of the guides all being in this kind of 7 to 10 range. Okay, next question, power and recognition. So power and recognition involves the desire to matter, to make a difference, to have a sense of self-worth that comes from accomplishment, to be recognized for achievements, to be listened to, and to leave a legacy. So for you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how big does that show up for you? Take a moment to think and hit submit. Okay. This is where it was for our guides in our live session. So again, even more leaning towards that 7 to 10 range where power and recognition is a big need for this group overall. Okay. So next one is freedom. The need for independence, autonomy, to have choices, to express creativity, to be able to take control of the direction of one's life. So if that's our definition of freedom, how big a need do you have for freedom? Okay. All right, here is where the guides were. Even like this graph is like almost half of the people who answered this question were 10 out of 10. And to me, that makes a lot of sense in this, in the way that most chief guides are self-employed. There are people who are independent coaches. So that ability to like take control, to have autonomy makes total sense to me, to be on that higher side of a need. Okay. So last one is we have one more need, and I want to introduce another aspect of Glasser's choice theory before we get to that last need. So we've talked about how we all have these needs in varying amounts, and the other aspect of choice theory that I think is really important is that we are going to get these needs met in healthy or in unhealthy ways. So no matter how they show up in our life, how big or small, we are going to get these needs met in healthy or in unhealthy ways. So that's just a key part of needs theory that I think is important to keep in the back of our mind. So last need that we're going to assess is the need for fun. So this is the need to find pleasure, to play and laugh, to relax, to learn, and to find psychological health through reducing stress. Okay, so for you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where is that need for you? And this is what it looked like in the session. So a little bigger of a kind of span where we were pretty evenly spread out between 5 and 10. So that's just interesting information. All right, so we're going to pause again with AHA slides, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to move now into some classic journaling. So if you can pull out something to write on, if you want to use paper and pen, I like journaling by hand. If you want to open up a blank Word document, you can do that. Either way is totally fine, but we're going to do a series of journal prompts. In the live sessions, we did these as collaborative conversations, and we're going to bring some of those conversations in after you've had a chance to reflect for yourself. So the first journal that I want you to do, and we will put a timer up on the screen to let you know about how long we would recommend taking. But the first journal is simply these two questions. What did you learn about yourself from doing that activity, from doing that Glasser's assessment, that needs theory assessment? And after you've spent 2 minutes on that question, can you see any connections between those insights that you had and your work as a chief guide? So we'll leave these questions up on the screen. We'll give you a timer to kind of guide your understanding of like about how long to take. Obviously, feel free to pause the video and take a little bit longer. And I'll be back in a few moments with more prompts. Okay, so you can go ahead and wrap up that journaling. What I'm going to ask us to do now is we're going to move into some tying the pieces of the session together that we've talked about so far. So we're going to go back and bring up that mindset of ignorant, stupid, evil. We're going to bring in Glasser's mindset of the needs theory, and we're going to bring back that Welder story and look at it and tie all of these pieces together. So we're going to do what I'm going to call some mindset journaling. So if you can flip to a new page, blank slate, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and we're going to ask you to take 2 minutes each on these questions. So here's the first one. I want you to go back to that scenario I shared about the welder. And I want you to imagine you were facilitating in that scenario and that you had a mindset of Glasser's needs theory, right? So you were trying to understand this person's behavior and stories through this 5 needs assessment. What might the stories in your head about the welder have sounded like? How would you have been making sense of his behavior? Take 2 minutes and journal on that question. Okay, wrap up that journal. And now, new page, new question. I'm going to ask you to imagine that same scenario, except this time you're looking at the welder through ignorant, stupid, evil, right? That's how you're really making sense of his behavior or his stories. So what might the stories in your head have sounded like then if you had this mindset of ignorant, stupid, evil? 2 more minutes. Okay. And now I just want you to take a moment to reflect. For me, I find it helpful to write down things when I reflect, but if you just want to do this in your head and take a moment, you can totally do that. You don't have to do the journaling. But I want you to reflect, what do you notice about the difference between those two mindset journals? Did you have any different emotions that came up? Did your body feel different? Were there different thoughts that you were having? What did you notice between those two different journals? If you want to pause the video and spend some time writing about the noticings, great. If you just want to take a moment to pause and to think, that works too. Okay. What I'm going to share with you now is in our live sessions, we had people get into small groups to talk about that question, what did you notice between the two different mindset journals? Folks were in their small groups, and then when they came back, we had a few people volunteer from a number of different small groups to have a conversation and to share back what came up in those small group conversations. So I'm going to hop you over to the live session and show you that debrief now.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, what we were talking about in our group is that each approach or each mindset involves making assumptions, but the assumptions in the needs model is much more gentle and generous than the assumptions in the ignorant, stupid, evil model.
My group, there were 3 of us, and we all had exactly pretty much the same. And the thing that struck me the most when I did the thing myself is how it was about how I changed and how I showed up differently. So in the first one, my goal was to be compassionate. How can I help him feel? Because my assumption was he didn't feel like he was belonging. What could I do to help him understand, feel more safe? And the other one, when he's like this, suddenly, if I'm thinking, he's ignorant or evil, I'm thinking, oh, this big guy, he's a threat. How do I protect some of the queer, students in the back? Is he going to attack them? And then my brain shuts down. Yeah. And then I thought, I can't be creative. And suddenly I'm like the protective, mother bear, not interested in helping this guy. So it's fascinating to me how I should have differently.
Yes.
Yes,
So
yes.
we talked a little bit about how in the first scenario with the needs, we came at it with empathy and curiosity and openness and listening, whereas in the second one, it was much more about judgment and not listening, but looking at it from conflict. But in the end, what Meg did so well is just acknowledge and validate, and that's how he was able to get to the point of the root cause.
Yes, yes. I was in the group with Laura, Anya, and Brenda, and everything you already said fits to our discussion. We realized that the different mindsets changes 3 things in us. How we listen, like literally our listening skills, capability, and space. We offer the person how we listen. The second one is how we relate. Are we coming from compassion, equalness, connection, or as with my words, as the arrogant, judgmental, know-it-all bitch from top down? And then the third one is how we show up. Yeah, so listening, relating, and how we show up is changed. And then at the last seconds, we went into, and how does it show up inside our chief groups as a guide? And I think it was Brenda who brought in the concept of control when our safety is threatened, when someone comes as a disturbance factor, our beautiful time management, our agenda might get destroyed. So that the challenge is there for us to manage our safety and control tendencies around time management. Yeah. I found that very pointing, very practical.
Yeah, I agree with everything else that's mentioned. And one thing that we were talking about too was the comment that Meg made that we have these needs and they're going to get met either in skillful, healthy, or unskillful and unhealthy ways. And so just recognizing when you put yourself in his shoes that he does not feel safe and love and part of a community. So he's kind of doing something reactive and kind of pushing them out and creating his own safety. So just having some compassion for that can help not get triggered or angry, because the word trigger came up like when he was like that. So.
And also the other word that comes up is fear on his part and my part. and how when we're fearful, we immediately go into the fight, flight, flee, fawn, which is not a good place to be when you're trying to facilitate.
Not an open.
Yeah.
No.
And another thing we talked about was at first we kind of said, oh, well, Meg was great. And he kind of opened up with that story. And then we were like, well, how did she have him do that? And then we got back to, oh yeah, the very first thing she did was acknowledge, take the concerns one at a time, and kind of validate him so that he could kind of relax his stress and his fear.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Oh, there's so much that you all have just been like, whoop, bam, like here's all the things. I really appreciate it. One thing you just did, Carrie, which I appreciate, is you did this gesture with your hands of like openness. And I find when I did those journaling exercises the first time, like that was something that was really evident for me. It's just the somatic difference between like feeling like this open and extension and compassion energy versus like the judgment ends up feeling like really closed off and like protective. And I think that's where that fear comes in, like both from like the participants or whoever's like receiving that story, but also from the facilitator's perspective of like, oh no, like I'm now fearful and kind of crunched in. And I find that to be such an interesting like somatic difference to come from, right? Of that openness, of that extension kind of energy. So I just wanted to name that and to say, like, you all have named a number of different like kind of dynamics and questions here of like the protective, the empathy, the curiosity, like what allows us to stay in that mindset. Abigail, did you want to jump into the fishbowl? Is that why you are back on camera?
Oh, no, I thought we were.
Oh, no worries. All good. Yeah, one thing that we were just starting to name there at the end with Jennifer's share is like what allowed the series of steps to happen, right? Like what allowed that interaction to go in the way that it went. And I'm actually going to take that as like a pulling us into our next piece. Okay, so we had so many different themes and things come up in our conversation. And there's a couple of things I want to like zoom in on and I want to kind of share back with you. And I've spent a lot of time unpacking like what made that moment with the welder go well and what made that moment possible, right? Because it's really possible to slip into ignorant, stupid, evil, and I think hit a very quick dead end with that person where it doesn't work. They don't come with us on the journey. They're not open to learning in certain ways. And I think there was also a series of moves that made it possible for that person to kind of go on that kind of like curiosity journey with me. And we spoke to a lot of it in the Fishbowl conversation. And I want to kind of just present a framework briefly back to you that I keep coming back to again and again, and that has really helped me understand like how can I concretize the moves that I make and how can I like bring that into other situations. So there's a kind of a step one to this is something I call a generous first draft. And that's really this part of the mindset piece of like what mindset allows us to create a generous story of that person. Oh, they have this need that needs to get met. There's this like threat that they're not used to. There's this fear, there's this anxiety, like all of those places to me are humanizing stories that allow us to have a generous first draft of where that person is coming from. And once we have created that, once we have a generous first draft, then we're able to make some really specific moves. And I think moves in a specific order. So I'm gonna say that this is like an order of operations that allow us to connect to people even when they're saying things that could really frustrate us, that are problematic or troubling, or just that we or other people in the room disagree with. So I call this framework connect, reflect, and direct. Okay, so I'm going to show you the framework and then I'm going to talk you through how that really showed up in the Welder story. And then we are going to apply it to a chief specific scenario. So connect is when we name a generous truth of their story that allows them to feel connected and heard. So that's the first move we make after we've got this generous story in our minds. Reflect is when we highlight the part of their story that you, the person who's responding, the group, or other people can relate to. So we start to reflect them back into kind of a larger context. And direct is when we kind of shine a light in a new direction or we shift their attention where we want them to go. And this order, I think, is really, really important. So let me tell you what this sounded like with the welder. That's really hard. When you feel isolated, made to feel unwelcome, excluded, that sucks, right? That was one sentence. Then reflect. I get that feeling. I have had that feeling in my own ways. And then I told a tiny bit, right, about this, like when I've gone into straight bars and made me feel like that feeling, I get that feeling. I understand what feeling we're talking about here. And then direct. That's why we're here. We don't want people to feel that way when they move through the world. That's why bumper stickers, right? And to me, when I say order of operations, I think if I start with direct, that's why we're here. We don't want people to feel that way. He does not come on that journey with me because I have not said, you are part of this. You actually have a human experience that we can use to connect you to the greater kind of direction or story we want to go. And to me, connect, reflect, and direct is an incredibly powerful set of protocol, basically, that we can use when someone has put something into the room that we're like, ooh, that has a potential to really cause some breakage, some distrust, some anger and frustration. How do we bring that person with us while keeping them human, but also being able to speak to the thing that they said that we don't necessarily like, right? Because in the direct, that's where we have a lot of power. As a facilitator, there's a lot of different places we can go with the direct that can shine a light in a particular direction, right? And shift their attention where we want it to go. So I'm going to introduce a couple of what I call my power phrases to give you some examples of what I mean by different places you can direct people's attention. These are not scripts, and these don't have to be your power phrases, but I just wanted to make it real about this is how it sounds in a workshop a lot for me when I am trying to get people to kind of go with me on a journey. So I'll just introduce those briefly, and then we'll start applying all of this to a chief specific scenario. So my first power phrase is, I want to pause you there and zoom us in on the part where you said blank. If I want to go universal, which is where I kind of went with my my Welder story, sometimes I want to actually go really specific and actually zoom us into an emotional piece or a specific thing that I think we can speak to a more kind of universal experience. That's where I want to pause them, be like, ooh, I'm going to stop you talking, but I'm going to zoom us into this part of your conversation. I want to flag what you just said. Some people think this, some people think this. I want to hold that conversation for blank. This is when I'm like, ooh, you just opened up a door and I don't want us to walk through it, right? But I do want to acknowledge that you opened the door up and that lots of us might have really different feelings about how you opened or what door you opened, right? And that kind of allows me to hold that conversation for a specific time. And my last one is, a lot of people share that view or opinion with you. I used to as well. You can include that or not. And then here's what I want to add. And this is where we're trying to add nuance or an understanding to the conversation or what's kind of been put in the room that will fundamentally change the kind of alchemy or energy of that comment, where we can add something that will change the makeup of how it's going to land with the group. So those are my power phrases and kind of different directions that I take people on when I'm kind of using the CRD method to try to connect with them, but also bring them into a new place. And we're going to use these to work a scenario. All right, so you have just heard the CRD method and those key power phrases for suggestions or ideas of what to do in the direct part of that method. And what we're going to do now is we're going to apply it to a specific chief scenario, and we're going to do that with a worksheet. So what we're going to have you do is we're going to use a real life scenario that occurred during core sessions. It's actually come up, almost this exact scenario has come up multiple times in different sessions. And we're going to have you apply that CRD method to that scenario. So the way you can get the worksheet is you can use the link below or go to this website address, bit.ly/HS worksheet. And when you go there, it will download an editable PDF for you. If you're on a device where you can edit that PDF, awesome. If you're on a device where you can't, you could just use a separate piece of paper and work through the separate questions. We're going to give you 10 minutes to work through the worksheet. And if you finish before those 10 minutes are up, feel free to just skip to the next chapter. When we come back, we'll hear some reflections from the group in the live session before we share out any answers or kind of like thoughts and responses that we have to the worksheet itself. So I'll give you some time to work through the worksheet, and then we'll be back. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the live sessions and we're going to hear a little bit of reflections and thoughts that people had about what the CRD method made possible for them when they were looking and applying it to that scenario.
You know, as I thought about it, the connect part was really important because that's something that we do try to do no matter what. But it really, if you go into it thinking of it that way, as I need to connect first and then be able to reflect. I mean, it's a model that allows us to think before we dive in, especially if it's something that's near and dear to our hearts as well. Because I can see how in this particular scenario, how I would respond to that person. I would come from her as a mother, you know, and started to, so that connection part was really, really important. So
yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and specifically for naming, like, oh, I can connect, I'm going to connect as a mother, right? And just that like moment of empathy and connection before wherever else you go, right, with the group afterward can make such a huge difference. Yeah, absolutely. And is it Smriti?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Thank you, Meg. This is really terrific. I just wanted to share that I really love this idea of what's a generous draft that you can create, because as I was thinking about that, one of the things that I know I have to address when I'm confronted with something like that is, okay, how am I taking a breath just to, again, put myself in a space? How am I taking a breath, centering myself so I can move forward? And so one way that I have done that in the past is to just say, okay, someone is saying something like this. Perhaps I need to just recognize that I've created a space which is safe enough for someone to bring this up. And that sort of helps to put me in a state of mind to say, okay, I still own this room and I'm still able to move forward and go to that direct piece as well.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And that idea of like the generous first draft is a practice, right? It is something that we build our capacity for. And I will say that like a lot of people are like, how do I get better at this in the moment? And my answer to that is you do it outside of those moments. Like you build the capacity for that generous first draft all the time. And then you can bring it up when it's really necessary. And when there's that real opportunity to get hooked into a different story, right? Or to like, or even just to be like, why did you have to bring that level of racism into the room? You know, like it's so easy to be incredibly frustrated in those moments. And when we have a practice of the generosity that, and coming up with the like, okay, where is the moment for, where is the way I can connect to this person? And that holding, that owning the room, like I still own the room energy, I think is so important to being able to make the group feel like you've got this, we've got this, we can move through this moment together.
I will admit that this felt a little like, whoa, like I could feel it in my chest. So, like I could feel the tightening in my chest. Was like, oh my gosh. And I've heard that this has come up a few times in groups, not exactly like this, but something similar. So, you know, in the, do you want me to share what I wrote down? Or
no, actually, if it's okay, Tammy, like I actually would love to pause right there, because what you said of like, I can feel it in my chest and like, I could feel my body's response. Like, I think that's actually a great thing for us to just like zoom in on for a sec, of that idea of like, our bodies respond very quickly to these things happening, and knowing what to do. To me, like, that's why it's really important to have kind of like a protocol or a set of steps, is because often our bodies kind of take over and we're like, whoa, what do we do in this moment? Right. So I actually love that. And I'll zoom in on that part of your share as like a really important thing for us to know, is like what comes up for us in these moments physically. Casey, I'm going to jump to you, and then I see we have more hands. We might need to hold those until right after the workshop, but Casey, go ahead.
Yeah, when we were talking about the part about connecting, well, you know, a woman of color, obviously I can identify with this story, and how I wanted to connect was to say, I think we can all relate to scenarios in our lives where we have advocated on behalf of someone else. So I chose to bring in advocacy because I think we can all find a story where we wanted to go to bat for someone. And I'm hoping that if I do that, it takes some of the charge out of it.
Yeah, I love that. I think that idea of like, how do I find the part in this story, not the content necessarily of the story, but the like kind of emotional reality or even kind of like bigger picture thing, right? That I can authentically connect to and that actually can take, like you said, like take that charge out of it. Somebody in the first session said, you know, I think I would connect to this person as a mother and like go immediately to that place of like, I want what's best for my kids too, right? And really like starting with that and then getting into you can sometimes in the direct part get into the charged part of it, but that first kind of move of connection, Casey, what you were talking about is like advocating for people and wanting a specific outcome for somebody is something I think we can all connect to. And you're also inviting the rest of the group to also see it through this new perspective, right? Or this different way of seeing that same moment. So I think that's a really powerful invitation and kind of like offering to that person in that moment is you're like, how about this thing? And they can actually like come with you a little bit on that. That is also what's happening, this advocacy piece. So one thing that is great about the guided recording is that we have a little bit more time and space. So we are going to share a example response, my example response to the worksheet scenario. So if you didn't do your worksheet, I would recommend pausing the video and doing the worksheet before you watch this section for a few reasons. The first is that it's really good to think through how you would respond to the scenario before you hear how somebody else would respond. The reason is it's so easy to get pulled into thinking that this is the only way to respond or this is the right direction to go. And there are a huge variety of directions that you can go that would be completely appropriate as responses to this particular scenario. So I would recommend you pause the video, go fill out that worksheet, and then come on back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to just offer a response to the scenario and try to do it as close to as like the timing and what it would sound like in the workshop itself as I can. And then we'll break it down and we'll talk a little bit about why I kind of include the different parts of the response that I do. So responding to Laura. Laura has just said this comment, and this is basically what I would say. Laura, I hear that there's a lot of anxiety about your son getting a job in the current job market. And I know for me, there have been a lot of people that I love who have been looking for jobs in the last few years. And it's really challenging when you want that to be able to like guarantee that they'll be successful and you can't. And I know for me, that has also brought up a ton of anxiety. You said in your comment that this is kind of related to the shift around diversity candidates. And I want to acknowledge that there are big consequences to a lot of the shifts that have been happening in business, both more broadly, but also specifically as it relates to diversity and inclusion. And some of those shifts create unintended consequences, and some of them create intended consequences. And either way, I know a lot of people feel that things are changing so rapidly, and that can be like really anxiety producing or make us feel very unsettled in all of it. I'm going to move us on to our next share, but I want to pin this conversation as a potential to come back to another time. It's a conversation that's really important to a lot of people. It can bring up big anxieties, fears, resentment, excitement, thoughts, reactions. And I think it might be good for us to discuss those reactions and thoughts to this big social shift that is happening when we can give it that conversation some time. Okay, so that's just one way that you might respond to Laura. And I'll just kind of break down the different aspects of the connect, the reflect, and the direct, and kind of like why I went to the places I did. So let's start with my generous first draft. So Laura is feeling a lot of anxiety around her son getting a job and is seeking out something to kind of pin that on or blame that anxiety on. This is new territory for her and she is scared. So that's my generous first draft. She has got anxiety, she's nervous, she's scared, and I have a lot of familiarity with that, kind of like with what anxiety can do to us. So that allows me to connect with her from a real place of empathy. So my connect, this is what the connect was and what you heard. I hear there's anxiety about your son getting a job in the current job market. The reflect, I know for me that there have been a lot of people who are looking for jobs in the last few years, and it's so challenging when you want them to be able to be successful and you can't. I know that's brought up a lot of anxiety too. So here, what I'm doing is just wanting to relate, right? The connect was about acknowledging what's going on for her and kind of offering back that generous first draft. The connect is much more of a, I can relate to that. I also feel anxiety. You know, for me, I'm not a parent, so I didn't connect on that level. I just connected to the, like, I've also wanted to like guarantee a particular outcome for people in my life. And it's really hard when we can't do that. So the direct was a little bit longer than the connect and the reflect, and that's often true. So we're going to take it in a couple of different parts. So this first part is me acknowledging that she didn't just say the thing about feeling anxious at her son about getting a job. She specifically identified like the reason behind that being diversity candidates. And so I specifically want to acknowledge that in my response, like name, like that's what she did. Not necessarily using the same language that she did, but just using, acknowledging that that was part of her response. And I also go in to acknowledge that like, that is a really big shift happening right now, and I'm slowly kind of zooming out to say like, there is a very real reality that things are changing in business along the lines of diversity and inclusion. So that's where I'm starting to direct, like, both acknowledge that reality, and I'm also starting to name that for people in the room. If they're like, Meg, like, why didn't you respond to the part of her comment, where she talked about diversity and inclusion, not just the anxiety part of her comment? I'm starting to do that in my direct response. The next one is like, some of those shifts are intended consequences, some are unintended, and either way it can feel like a lot is changing so quickly. What I'm wanting to do here is acknowledge to me that, what I want to acknowledge is that there are intended consequences, and some of those might be what people are thinking in the room. Like, yes, actually, it is harder for a white man to get a job than it was 10 years ago because he was overly privileged to get that job. And now, because we've corrected that imbalance, it is actually more difficult, and that's an intended consequence. I'm not getting into the nuance of that, but I am naming it. So I'm doing a little bit of like, there are intended consequences and there are also unintended consequences. Both of those things I think are true, and both of those I think allow the stories in people's heads to be spoken to without having to go into specifics. And then the last part of the direct, I'm going to move us on to our next share. That is where I am saying, like, this is what is about to happen, right? The context of this scenario was that people were sharing their stories, and this is what came out at the end of Laura's story. So in that context, I want to move to the next person's story, and I kind of want to put a lid on this box that Laura opened with her comment. So that's what I'm starting with the end of my direct with, is I'm going to move us on to our next share. And then I'm telling her and the group why I'm doing that. I want to pin this conversation to come back to another time. I'm acknowledging that people might have really different reactions to this. Some people might be with Laura. Some people might be with other people, in that we have really different emotions. And that's where that list of like anxieties, fears, excitements, like I can actually name a bunch of different emotions. And what that allows me to do is speak to a bunch of different experiences that are being had around this like shift in diversity and inclusion. And then I say, I want to come back to that, we could come back to that at a time where that conversation can be given some time or given appropriate space. And that's a little bit of my context of like, this is why we're not doing it right now. So that is a little bit of a walkthrough of like what a connect, reflect, and direct can sound like, and also why specifically I kind of went in the direction that I went with my worksheet. So hope that was helpful and perhaps interesting to just hear what it might sound like and kind of the intentional choices that I was making behind it. So we have a few more things in our guided recording, and the first thing I want to move us to now is returning to those baseline questions that we asked you at the very beginning of the session. So if you can once again go to this website address, ahaslides.com/hschief, you will be brought back to AHA Slides. And if you need to click through to get to a couple of the future slides, please do that. If you've left it open the whole time, awesome. And when you're there, we're just going to return to those baseline questions. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how anxiety producing do you find these moments, or do you envision finding these moments now after you've completed this session? Go ahead and evaluate yourself 1 to 10. Okay. Now you've done that, go ahead and hit submit. And next question, on the scale of 1 to 10, how ready do you feel to handle these moments? Okay, hit submit. And last question, when it comes to navigating these types of moments, I have no strategies, a ton of different strategies. Where are you on this scale? Okay. All right. So now that we've got those baseline questions, I want to just let you know a few things. So we collected a slew of questions from our participants in our live session, and we have put together some Q&A videos, and you can check out those Q&A videos. We've left a link below to them, and they are indexed with all of the questions that were asked, so you can actually read through the description and just jump to specific questions that you might also have or are curious about. So please feel free to check out those Q&A videos. There is a lot of things that we didn't get into the sessions that you might have also had questions about that you may find answers for in the Q&A videos. As we mentioned, there is going to be a resource page with all of the links to any theories that we've mentioned, further readings or exploration that you can do, and that is linked below. And finally, we would love your thoughts and your evaluation of what you thought about this guided recording. This is one of the first times we're doing this sort of guided recording to a session, and so we would really love and appreciate your feedback. As facilitators and as coaches, you know how much insight you can get from people giving you valuable feedback, so we really welcome and would sincerely appreciate it. There is an eval link below, and we would love you to take 5 minutes to fill that out right now, rather than thinking you're going to come back to it. We always encourage people, as soon as you see an eval, fill out the eval. It gets so much harder in the future. So we would really appreciate you doing that. And right at the top of the eval, there is a way for you to submit your worksheet. So if you want us to take a look at it, you want to share that back, share your work, then we would super welcome you to do that. And that is right at the top of the evaluation. So that's going to do it for us and this guided recording of Holding Space. I hope you learned a ton. I hope that you feel less anxious, more ready, and have a few more strategies in your tool belt for the next time a conflict, micro or macro, comes up in your core sessions. If you ever want to get in touch with us, hello@facilitator.cards is our email, and we would love to hear from you. And until next time, we wish you the best of luck in your core sessions and happy facilitating.